the thing about it that is getting lost, I guess, that makes people cling to the positions that they do ultimately in this fight is that, I have to focus. I have to change the shift and focus of the way that I feel about the fucking rape story, to focus on what some of the harms could be if my debunkings proved to be wrong, and they weren't, and there were actually 62 million men engaged in this behavior, then we've got huge problems. Because we just do not like. This problem came to my attention a number of years ago, I guess, because I started to realize, that there were news reports that were coming out all over the place about the overcrowded prisons and the problems that it was causing, and the fact that it was causing such violence inside the system and everything, and that you know it also made me worry that these men were not there for stays that were basically permanent, so they would come out after being in these overcrowded environments, having learned a lot of violent tactics and everything, being unleashed on the environment as hardened criminals, which I heard one stat which suggested that, the cost of sending somebody to prison and them coming out as a hardened criminal was far greater than, any good the prisons were actually doing. It offset a huge amount of the good that was being done by just one prisoner coming out that way. It was like disproportionate by like truly obscene and gross amount. But on top of all that, and the harms of releasing a hardened criminal back into society, like on top of that, you just you have overcrowded prisons. You don't have room ultimately to lock up 62 million, men in particular. And if it is, that bad, if it is the stat, is accurate that it's 62 million, then, we won't even be able to lock 3% of them up, because we just, without taxes going up, without women having to pay to contribute, to the situation, without, so all you OnlyFans girlies and such, you're all gonna be, you thought you achieved escape velocity. Well, this will bring you crashing back down to earth. Like you're gonna have to build a whole lot of new prisons and everything because you just don't have the capacity to house this many men in the prisons that we've got. And then you've got the fact that most of them will not be going away for life without parole, so they're going to be released at some point, probably bitter, angry at society, resentful for all of it, and women will take the blame, will take the brunt of their anger all over again. So do you understand, like, why I might be trying to debunk this and just discredit this stat, and why we are, like, you may be saying, what does it matter? If the appropriate number of men who should be looking at this is zero. Well, ma'am, if that stat is that high, it does matter because you just don't have the capacity, in our society to lock, 62 million men up. You don't. We don't have the capacity in our prisons. They're already full of nonviolent drug offenders and everything, and they're already having trouble housing 2 million, 2 point something million of them, as it stands. This is already an issue in our society, that our civilization. So, the only solution for the feminist will be to build a whole lot of new prisons, and that's going to come at taxpayer expense, to which, women with jobs will end up having to contribute to pay for. It will impoverish them further and everything. It will have impacts on them economically. And for them, and the truth of the matter is that if it is at that astronomically high, and that's just to lock 3% of them up. I mean, if you're going to lock all 62 million of them up, if that were true, then and really the 80 million, in March figure that our people are citing to point out that it's even worse. I mean, if that's the case, we're already taxed to an extreme amount to house the number of people that are in there at this point. The cost to the taxpayers is already pretty hefty to house the prisoners that we've got on hand. But let's add another additional like what 62 million to that population. Like at that point, if you're paying to build that many prisons and everything, that's pretty much the entire budget is being devoted to building. There's no money for anything other than building prisons in our society. At that point, and is this the kind of world you want to live in? So when you ask me what does it matter, that the numbers are smaller, this is why it matters.